Welcome to Trinity Wesleyan Church Online. We are so glad to have you here today. We've been praying for you, and we're excited for what God is going to be speaking to you today. As a pastor, there's a lot of things I always say that I've never been taught to do this. Like I went to 4 years of university and I've never been taught to do these things as a pastor. It's just things that you do. And there's just many times I'm like, I never thought I'd be doing that. They didn't teach us that in college. Like plumbing or event planning or doing construction, or I just finished writing a grant for $150,000 for the church. So be praying for that comes through. So that's exciting. I've been an inflatable cleaner. I've done social media. I've done design. And researcher as a pastor is one thing I never thought I would add to this list. So I was writing my sermon at a coffee shop here in town, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to ask people a couple things because I want to see what other people think. Not just what I think, but what other people think in our community. So I did some research of some of the baristas there, and I asked them, I said, what do you consider something of value to you? What's something you consider of value? And one person said, my home. Another person said, myself. And the other person said, my education. That's something I consider valuable. And I said, okay, so what do you take pictures of? Like we have cameras on our phones and we're always taking pictures. What's the thing that you take the most pictures of? And the person that valued herself said, I take pictures of myself. She takes a lot of selfies. The other person said, my cat. The other person said, my kids, something we take pictures of. We usually take pictures of things that we like or enjoy. We just don't take pictures of things we don't like or enjoy. And then the last question I asked them is, what is something you would never get rid of? And one of the people said, something that my mother gave me, a family heirloom. One person said, I'd never give money away, never get rid of money. Other person said a signed Babe Ruth baseball card. I would not get rid of that for a long time either. But think about it for yourself. What is something you consider of value to you? Just think about it right now. What is valuable to you? Second question is, what do you take pictures of? Could be your pool. It could be your kids or your dog, or please don't take pictures of your cat because I don't like cats. What's something that you would never get rid of? Ask yourself that. What's something I would never get rid of? And I think what this starts to do is it starts to put into our minds what we value in our life. What we consider a value, what we take pictures of, something we would never get rid of. That's something we consider of value. Today we're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 18, starting at verse 1. And it starts here, it says, after a long time, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. So it says, after a long time. After a long time, they hadn't had rain in 3 years. They had not had rain in 3 years. Just imagine what that would do. Hadn't rained in 3 years. Just remember that for later. And Elijah, he's this prophet. He's the good guy. He's the guy that's trying to fix things. And then we have Ahab on the other side. He was a bad king. He was already a bad king, but he married somebody named Jezebel. And Jezebel and her family was way worse. Her family was very into the worship of Baal and Asherah. And so he was the worst king of all Israel combined. And these are not my words. This is not just my opinion. But we go back 2 chapters to chapter 16, verse 30. It says, Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Ahab also made an Asherah pole and did more to arouse the anger of God, the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than did all the kings of Israel before him. So Ahab was a bad king. And then he got mixed with a bad apple, Jezebel. We put those two together and he becomes the worst king Israel had ever seen. So Jezebel, a little bit of her background. Jezebel is the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians. When Ahab and Jezebel got married, Ahab started worshiping Baal and Asherah because it was a family tradition. And this is Jezebel's family legacy. Ethbaal, the king of the Sidonians, and Jezebel's dad, he was a priest in the Phoenician or Egyptian empire. And this explains her devotion to the Egyptians and the Egyptian gods Baal and Asherah. So Ethbaal, the king of Sidon, Ethbaal went and assassinated the king of Tyre and took the throne at age 36. So now Jezebel and Ahab are together, and like they got married. They probably liked each other, but to me, this is just my opinion, it is almost a political move because Jezebel wanted more power and Ahab wanted more power. So they combined forces together. They got married. So now her dad is the king of Tyre and Ahab is the king of Israel. And there's many gods that were worshipped in this time in the Egyptian culture, but the main ones that were worshipped by Ahab and Jezebel, the leaders of these two kingdoms, were Baal and Asherah. And Baal actually means Lord. You go back to it, it actually literally means Lord. So they're making Baal the Lord of everything. And Baal was the god of fertility. Not just children, but the fertility of the earth. And they saw him as somebody who controlled nature. He's also pictured with a lightning bolt in his hand and also a staff that goes into the ground. So it wasn't just the children, but the fertility of the earth, where the crops come from. Baal was also called the prince or the lord of earth. And then we go to the other one, Asherah. Asherah, they made these Asherah poles, and they put these in the highest places of Egypt and Canaan. And Asherah in the secular worship, when they are looking at her, she was the mother of Baal. She was also a fertile deity, but she was called the queen of heaven. So together, Baal, the prince or the lord of earth, and the queen of heaven controlled, quotes, heaven and earth, defying that God was the one true God. This is the legacy that Ahab married into. He was terrible, but now he's the worst. But Ahab, he was from the tribes of Israel. He's not foreign to the one true God, but he's openly defying God. He knew God. It had been passed down for generations and generations, and he knew God, but he didn't know God. He knew about God, but he didn't worship God. He put things in front of God instead of making God the highest priority. But we don't worship Baal. We don't worship Asherah. He said, I'm not following Satan. I'm not sinning. But just not sinning is not worship to God. Just not sleeping in and making sure that you're in church is not worship to God. Just not doing something, being obedient and just not doing something doesn't mean that you're following God. It means you have good morals. William Wilberforce, he says, a private faith that does not act in the face of oppression is no faith at all. You can know God, but if you don't know God, you don't listen to his commands, even if you're just not sinning, if you don't know him and you're just privately have your faith, if you're not acting in the face of oppression, that's not faith at all. That's not worship of God. God doesn't want us to just not sin, but he wants to replace that sin with holiness. He wants to give us something else. Not just don't do this, but here's something better. And a lot of times we look at God and we're like, oh, he just doesn't want me to do this. He doesn't want me to marry this person. He doesn't want me to have a nice car. He doesn't want me to fill in the blank. But he wants to give us the best for our life. I'm not saying a brand new car. He wants to give us the most peace, the most comfort, the most joy. And a lot of times we think that God is giving us less, but God wants to give us more. He wants to give us more of the things that are of him. We keep going in 1 Kings 18, verse 2. It says, so Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. And it sounds like he's going over to meet Ahab. But that's where Elijah was heading. He went straight to the source because God told him to. It's like the leap of faith. It's like I'm stepping into the unknown. He's going straight to the source because God told him to go and present himself, even if it was with fear and trembling. And I'm going to summarize the next few verses, but Elijah is heading to Ahab. So at the same time, Ahab was talking to Obadiah, his palace administrator, who was a man of God. He said, go try to find some grass because there was a severe famine in Ahab's kingdom. Remember, 3 years ago, there was no rain, there's no crops, there's no food. And this is just a side note. Verse 4, it says that Jezebel, Ahab's wife, had been killing off the Lord's prophets. It's a side note, but it's a huge thing. Imagine Elijah, one of the Lord's prophets, going to Ahab and talking to Ahab. He could have been killed on the spot for no reason. So as Obadiah is heading out to find grass for the king's animals, he met Elijah on the road. And Elijah greets Obadiah and says to Obadiah to go tell his master Ahab, Elijah's here. But Obadiah had been hiding the Lord's prophets, about 100 of the Lord's prophets in some caves and in just hidden places. And he's afraid of what would have happened if he had been found out. If he went back to Ahab and said, hey, Elijah's here, and Elijah wasn't there, he was certainly to be killed. So Elijah promises, he said, I'm going to meet with Ahab. Like, you have my word. I'm going there right now. So we get to the meat of the story. It says in verse 16, it says, so Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet with Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, is that you, you troubler of Israel? Elijah responds, he says, I have not made trouble for Israel, Elijah replied, but you and your father's family have. Ethbaal and Jezebel and yourself, you've brought this trouble on yourself. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. It's not Elijah bringing this trouble to him. Ahab had already made this terrible situation for himself, that this famine is in the land and that there hasn't been any rain because they had been worshiping the Baals. Verse 19, it says, "Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel." Now, Mount Carmel sounds like a place I would love to be. Mount Carmel, milk and honey, chocolate, ice cream, just all that. Bring me to that Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel was nothing like that. It says, "And bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." Basically in cahoots with, like they're all together. They're all plotting against. So 850 prophets of these other gods versus one prophet, Elijah. So can you just imagine that fear, like one person standing in front of almost 1,000 people, and you have to defend God. But the great thing is God doesn't, or we don't have to defend God. God defends himself. All Elijah had to do was be obedient. Verse 20, it says, "So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, 'How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him.' But the people said nothing. Then Elijah said to them, 'I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Get 2 steers, get 2 bulls. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces, put it on the wood, but not set fire to it yet. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord.'" Again, Lord. They're calling to the Lord Baal, but Elijah is calling to the one true Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. Then all the people said, "What you say is good." They agree to this, like, okay, let's do this, because there's no way you're going to win. Verse 25, Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire." So they took the bull given to them and prepared it. They called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. "Baal, answer us," they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar that they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought. He's thinking about something, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." And we go back to the original meaning. Maybe he is sleeping actually means maybe your God is dead. Maybe your God is dead and he just needs to be brought back to life because something's not happening. Like, where's this Baal that you are worshiping? So they shouted louder and they start slashing themselves with swords and spears as their custom until the blood flowed. Verse 29, midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Then Elijah said to the people, "Come here to me." They came to him and repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Elijah took the 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Your name shall be Israel." With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. He dug a trench around it and large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bowl into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood." "Do it again," he said. And they did it again. "Do it a 3rd time," he ordered. And they did it a 3rd time. The water ran down around the altar, even filled the trench. At the time of the sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, Let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Verse 37, answer me, Lord. Answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God. Not Baal, Lord, but that you are Lord, and that you're turning their hearts back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. This fire came down so powerfully that it burned the wood, the sacrifice, the soil, dried up the water. The part that messes with me is it burned the stones. It was hot. There was fire that burned stones. And you can actually go back. There is a place where present day Mount Carmel is. There is a place that is still burned to this day where there's no vegetation around on top of Mount Carmel. It's not just something that people have made up, but we can go back and still see that that place was burned up, that these stones still have burn marks on them. Verse 39, when all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." And imagine, like, to their terror, like, we've been worshiping this other God, and oh, this God is mad. He brought down fire. He brought down all this stuff. Okay, I'm getting this now, like, okay, He is the Lord. I'm just going to let that happen. Then verse 40, Elijah commanded them, seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone get away. They seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley and slaughtered there. But we don't worship Baal. We don't worship Asherah. Or do we? If Baal was the prince of earth and Asherah was the queen of heaven, we just might. Baal was the sustainer of everything fertile. What is our current Baal? Is it our money, our bank accounts, our vehicles, our houses, the food that we have, inflation? But we're not worshiping Asherah either. Asherah was the queen of heaven. And they put these Asherah poles in the highest places. On every single mountain in the highest place, they would put an Asherah pole to worship the god Asherah. But what are we putting in the highest places? What are we putting above God? What are things on earth that we're putting our trust in above God? As I was reading, I asked myself a question. It kind of seems unnecessary that Elijah would have slaughtered the prophets of Baal. But he was getting rid of the cancer that was spreading. He was cutting out the evil that was in Israel. But it wasn't enough that these prophets lost, but Elijah had to get rid of this damaged DNA to keep it from spreading again. Because what did the Israelites typically do? Okay, we see God, we're going to follow you. And then they're like, a couple weeks later, we're like, yeah, but I like this thing a lot better. He's starting fresh. And starting fresh sounds great. Like getting a do-over in life sometimes would just be great. But do-overs in life are difficult. But the Bible says that the Lord's mercies are new every morning. You can start fresh. It starts with worshiping God and sacrificing the things that is not honoring to Him. That's why we talk about we search within. One of the 3 pillars of who we are at Trinity is to search within. God, look inside me and see what is not of you. Take that from me. I'm going to sacrifice that to you. But a sacrifice doesn't come back. A sacrifice, when it's burned up, when it's given, you don't get that back. We have to give a full sacrifice. To give everything to God and say, you know what, God, I'm done. I can't go back to this. I can't go back to this. I can't keep living like this. And that's why Elijah had to slaughter the prophets of Baal and Asherah. He had to slaughter them because he didn't want this coming back into the kingdom, into Israel. That's how bad it was. That the people are just like, you know what? Yeah, God's God. And then it's like, you know what? I don't want to follow God anymore. It's too difficult. It says that God is a jealous God. I was like, isn't jealousy a sin? Isn't coveting one of the things that God talked about in the 10 Commandments? But from last week, we talked about in the last week of How to Bible, God can't sin. God is holy. God can't sin. When they talk about this jealousy, it's when you want something that doesn't belong to you. That's jealousy. And sometimes there's just not a word that fits to describe the feeling that you have. So we give a word that doesn't fully mean what we want. Sometimes there's just not a word for it. But this Hebrew word that is used, this jealous, the only person this jealous is talking about, the only way that it is ever used is that it's reserved for God. Meaning that God has no rival. There is nothing above God. God is the highest thing. Not these Asherah poles, not these things that we make God to be our gods that we are worshiping. God has no rival. There is nothing above him. And it's just like in the Gospels, Jesus said, like, unless you hate your brother or sister, your family, or even your own mother. I couldn't say that. I couldn't say that I hate my mom. But unless you hate your own mother, you cannot follow me. Obviously, you love your family. But it's going to look like hate compared to how much you love me. To how high you're going to put me. To the things that you're going to get rid of for me. It's going to look like hate. Jesus is not saying go hate your mother. But we're supposed to honor our mother and father. But it's going to look a lot different than what you think it does. Because I want your love for me to be the highest priority. God is worthy. God is so worthy of our worship. And even our worship is not sufficient enough to give God the glory that he deserves. If everything we did in this life was worship back to God, it would still not be enough because he is so far beyond anything we could ever dream or think of. That's how holy he is. We think about this from a biblical perspective. Why is God worthy? Why is God worthy? Why do we worship God? As we look at the prophets of Baal, their God fell flat. Didn't take the sacrifice. There's only one God who came through that day. He gave a sacrifice. And we look further, we keep going in from the Old Testament to the New Testament, that God gave us a sacrifice, a perfect sacrifice. One that came, we were in John 1 last week, talking about how Jesus came about. Jesus had already been there. He was at the beginning of creation, and he's the only person that could have come and given us the perfect sacrifice. But not just that Jesus died, but that Jesus rose again. Jesus rose back to life. It's the only God that could ever have done that. Everybody else has stayed dead. All these other prophets that had gone before Muhammad and all these different religions of the world, no prophet has come back to life. God is worthy. He puts Jesus at the head of the church. He's the only person that could be the head of the church. I mean, you think I'm the head of the church. I am not the head of the church. I have been given the opportunity to lead here, but I am not the head of the church. Jesus is leading me, and I'm leading you. I can't do it on my own. If I did everything that was my idea, it would not go well. I have good ideas, but I would make it a religion about me on accident. It'd be about what I like, who I like, the things I want to do. But when we put Jesus as the head of our church, the highest priority, everything works out. So that's the biblical version. We can go biblical, but if you're just like, you know what, I don't know if I believe the Bible. But here's the logical version. You look up the definition of what worthy means. It says having worth or value or merit. Worth or value or merit. Jesus is the only one that has that value or worth or merit. Because there's things that nobody wants to find out about our own life. And you're just like, if somebody found this out, I would hate that. But there is nothing. Jesus has the merit. God has the merit. He has the backing. He has everything that he needs. The second definition of worthy is a prominent person, elevated, distinguished, honor, somebody who is of that state. And the third definition is sufficient and safe. We could have a couple of those definitions, but nobody has all those. And even if you think you have all those, it does not compare to glory, the glory of God. We will never be able to put ourselves above God. And that's what Jesus is saying, or that's what God is saying. That's what the Bible is saying, that anything that is put above me, it's an idol. You're worshiping something that is not true. God is a jealous God. God says that he's jealous, but we are rightfully his. He wants his people back. He wants his people to be close to him, to be in communion with him again. It's not jealousy when it's yours. It's already yours. So we go back into the all-in commitment that about half of our church made. All in is giving everything. Everything that you have. I'm going to give my time. I'm going to make my job about you. I'm going to make this a place where I can worship you. That we're tearing down our modern day Asherah poles. And we're saying, no, I'm not putting anything above you. I will not elevate anything above you. That I'm going 100% in. I'm not just trying it and just like going to dip my toes in, but I'm going to give 100%. That I'm going all in. And that's worship to God. We keep going in this story after the prophets had been slaughtered. Elijah says to Ahab, you better get going. There's a downpour coming. There is rain coming. It's been 3 years. You better get on your chariot and get safe. Because you're not going to be safe when this water comes. Ahab leaves. Elijah stays. He bends his knees, puts his head between his knees, and just prays and thanks God. After he does that, he sends his servant to the sea and report back whatever you see. First time he goes, there's nothing. Second time he goes, there's nothing. 3 times he goes, nothing. There is nothing to report. The 7th time, the faith of Elijah, keep going back until there's something. The 7th time the servant came back, he said there's a cloud the size of a man's fist. He's looking at it and he's like, it's about that big. It's far off. He goes, that's the one. We got to get going. They start to go. Skies get black. The wind picks up. Elijah catches up to Ahab as it starts raining. He's probably like, I wasn't going to say I told you so, but you kind of see what's happening right now. It starts raining. Not a huge downpour yet. It's just a little bit. And probably Elijah caught up to Ahab Probably that adrenaline. You're just like giddy. You're just excited. Like me and a lot of the people after the 4th of July parade last year were just like giddy. We couldn't go to sleep. Like everybody just wanted to talk and be excited. That adrenaline that Elijah had mixed with the disappointment of Ahab. He's like, I'm a fraud. I'm a failure. How can I lead these people? I will never be able to lead these people again. I lost this huge spiritual battle. He's saying everything I know and made people believe is a lie. So I imagine he's on his chariot going back. He's just kind of down, depressed. I don't know what to do. Elijah catches up to him. Rain starts coming down. It came down, ended this drought of 3 years. But it only happened after they got rid of their Baals and their Asherah poles, and the one true God defended himself. Elijah didn't have to defend. He was obedient to what God said. Go present yourself. Go make an altar. I'm going to do the rest. I need you to get the sacrifice ready, and I'll do what it takes. This is your true and proper worship. Because everything else fails. Everything else falls short. These Baals and these Asherahs that we put into our lives, they're going to fall short. And we're going to call out to them, help me, help me. I wish I had more money. I wish I had a better vehicle. I wish I had this. But they will never make you fulfilled like God fulfills us. This is why we're talking about worthy this whole summer. That God is worthy of our worship. And he's asking for everything. Now, this is going to be the hardest sermon of the series. The rest is going to be very easy for you to understand. For us to, it's going to be more happy. It's going to be more fun. But this is the foundation of what worship is and why he is worthy, why we worship.